India.
Yeah.
For centuries, it's been, well, a real powerhouse of innovation, hasn't it?
Absolutely. From ancient metallurgy that still kind of baffles experts to those groundbreaking mathematical ideas and just this incredible artistic heritage.
Right. So let's unpack this. India is aiming for that $5 trillion economy mark.
A huge goal.
Exactly. And a really key piece of that puzzle, it seems, is nurturing the creativity and innovation we already have, especially, at the grassroots level.
Yeah, where so much ingenuity often just happens, sometimes without much fanfare.
It often goes unheralded. And thinking globally for a sec, the creative economy is just booming, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredibly dynamic. The UN CTAD, that's the UN Conference on Trade and Development, they put out some figures recently, their 2024 outlook.
Okay, what did they find?
Well, get this. Global trade in creative services hit $1.4 trillion back in 2022.
Wow, $1.4 trillion.
Yeah, and that's up almost 30% since just 2017.
That's rapid growth.
It is, and it's not just services. Creative goods exports, they climbed 19% too, reaching $713 billion.
So massive numbers overall.
Huge. The whole sector, globally, generates over $2 trillion a year. And jobs. Nearly 50 million people worldwide.
That really puts India's own economic goals into perspective, doesn't it? This is a major global force we need to be part of.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to India's aspirations, it really underlines, the kind of economic landscape we need to actively engage with.
And what's driving that global growth? What are the big sectors?
Well, leading the pack is software services that accounts for over 41%. Then you've got R&D, research and development at about 30%.
Okay, tech and research heavy.
Definitely. And then the third big chunk is a mix: advertising, market research, architecture, making up around 15.5%.
Interesting. So bringing it back to India then, where do we stand in all this? We're not exactly new to the game, are we?
Not at all. If you look back at, say, 2019, our creative exports were already pretty significant, $121 billion.
$121 billion.
Okay. And the bulk of that, the lion's share, was actually services, about $100 billion.
Right. So mirroring that global trend towards services.
Exactly. But even in goods, while design work makes up the biggest chunk, around 87.5%, we can't forget our traditional arts and crafts.
Oh, yes. Absolutely vital.
They still contribute about 9% of those goods exports, so a really important part of the picture.
So we have this established presence, these decent export numbers. The Indian creative industry itself, what's it valued at currently?
Right now, it's estimated around $30 billion, and it employs a fair chunk of the workforce, about 8%. Plus, just last year, creative exports grew by 20%, generating over $11 billion.
Okay, so there's growth, there's employment, there are exports, but there seems to be a but coming.
Well, yeah. This is where it gets interesting, especially for anyone thinking about India's economic path forward, like, say, UPSC aspirants. There's this kind of paradox. We see these figures, this activity, but there's also this feeling, this strong sense that the huge amount of creativity happening at the grassroots level, it isn't quite translating into scalable, impactful innovation, the kind that really drives broad economic growth.
Exactly. That's the disconnect I feel, too. It's like we know the potential is there. Creativity, that spark, that new idea, we see it everywhere.
Yeah, the source even talks about different kinds, emotional creativity, deliberate creativity.
Right. And we see these amazing local solutions popping up all over India, often just born out of pure necessity. So what's the holdup? Why isn't all this grassroots energy automatically turning into big innovations with major economic impact?
I think the absolute key is understanding the difference between creativity and innovation. They aren't quite the same thing.
Okay, explain that distinction.
So creativity is that first spark, right? The novel idea, the raw potential. But innovation needs support. It needs an ecosystem to nurture that idea and help it grow, help it scale.
Oh, okay. Think of it like this. Creativity is the seed, but innovation needs fertile ground, water, sunlight, resources, structure, cultivation to actually grow into something productive.
That's a great analogy. The seed versus the whole farming process. Exactly. And while we see these brilliant seeds of ingenuity locally, the fertile ground, the institutional support, the investment frameworks often isn't there to help them flourish. For UPSC aspirants listening, this is really crucial. How do we actually build that supportive ecosystem?
That really clarifies it. And the source we're looking at highlights some brilliant examples, doesn't it? Organizations like GIAN, the Grassroots Innovations Augmentation Network.
Yes, they do fantastic work showcasing these bottom-up inventions.
Things like that pedal-powered washing machine, I remember reading about that, or the MIDI-cool fridge. made from clay.
Amazing ideas, practical solutions solving real problems for real people.
Totally. But as the source points out, they often stay as these kind of isolated success stories. They don't always spread as widely as you think they could or should.
And that's where looking internationally can be useful. The source mentions the Indonesian Amsterdam project.
Amsterdam, what was that?
It was a student project, actually. They used principles from nature biomimicry, it's called, to design a flood protection system.
Learning from nature's designs.
Precisely. And it's a powerful example of how creative thinking, even at that student or grassroots level, if it gets attention, maybe some investment, it can generate solutions that could potentially be used globally. It highlights that potential for looking towards nature for sustainable ideas.
Okay, so if we want more of those kinds of impactful innovations coming from India's grassroots things that boost the economy and tackle social issues, what needs to change, what does the source suggest on the policy front?
Right. The source points to a few key areas for intervention. First off, investment. More of it.
Not just throwing money around, presumably.
No, not just increasing the overall pot. It's about being strategic. Directing capital specifically towards these often informal, community-driven innovations, especially those tackling big issues like climate adaptation.
Climate adaptation is huge.
Absolutely. And think about India's climate tech sector overall. It pulled in quite a bit of investment last year.
I remember seeing headlines about that.
But here's the striking part, maybe a big area for future policy focus. Those grassroots innovations, which often have really sustainable, locally suited climate solutions, they get a tiny, tiny fraction of that funding.
That seems counterintuitive. Why?
Well, it raises a big question for economic development, doesn't it?
Right.
How do we get better at channeling money to where it can create these transformative social, economic, and environmental benefits right at the local level?
Okay, investment is one piece. What else?
Intellectual property rights. IPR, that's another big one.
Protecting the ideas themselves. How does that work for someone, say, inventing something in a small village? They probably don't have lawyers on speed dial.
Exactly the problem. So the idea is IPR reform, making the system more accessible, more supportive for indigenous and community innovations, giving them a way to protect their unique creations without getting tangled in complex, expensive legal processes.
So it's about empowering them to actually benefit from their own ingenuity.
Precisely. It provides a crucial incentive. It stops their ideas just being taken. For those studying legal frameworks, you could think about how simplified, maybe district-level IPR registration could work.
Interesting. That links to another idea mentioned, the One District, One Product initiative. That's been about promoting local crafts, right?
Yes, ODOP has shown some promise there. The source suggests extending that concept. Imagine a One District, One Innovation program.
Okay, One District, One Innovation. How would that function?
The thinking is you create a similar structure, but focus specifically on finding, nurturing, maybe helping to scale up local innovations within each district.
So like building local pipelines for new ideas.
Exactly. It could be a really powerful way to connect local cleverness with wider networks, funding, expertise, support. For UPSC aspirants thinking about regional development, it's a pretty concrete strategy, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need to think about who runs it locally. Expert panels, maybe.
It makes sense. Local focus, local support. And the final piece mentioned is collaboration, right? It can't just be individuals or just government.
Absolutely essential. Public-private partnerships are key. We need to build bridges.
Bridges between who?
Between the grassroots innovators themselves, private investors, research institutions, government agencies, creating a much more dynamic ecosystem.
So everyone talks to each other.
Basically, yes. Collaboration provides access to things individual innovators often lack: serious funding, technical help, links to markets, mentorship, things that are often out of reach otherwise.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've seen India has this incredibly rich vein of creativity, especially at the grassroots.
Definitely. No shortage of ideas.
But there's this challenge, a gap, really, between the creative spark and turning it into widespread, scalable innovation that helps the economy and society.
And a big part of that seems to be the lack of strong institutional support and, crucially, targeted investment.
We talk about those cool examples, the pedal washer, the MIDI-cool fridge, even that Indonesian flood project showing the ingenuity and the potential.
Yeah, illustrations of what's possible when creativity gets nurtured.
And the policy levers we discussed. More focused investment, especially for grassroots climate solutions where there's a big funding gap right now.
Right, that disparity is quite stark.
Then there's making IPR work for local innovators, the One District, One Innovation idea, and fostering those crucial public-private collaborations.
It all points towards building that supportive ecosystem we talked about.
So looking ahead, it feels like India's journey to becoming, a major global economic force really depends quite heavily on bridging this creativity innovation gap.
I think that's spot on. With the right policies, the right appreciation for ingenuity at all levels, the creative economy can be an even more powerful driver for inclusive growth, really benefiting the country from the ground up.
So a thought for you, the listener, and particularly those of you preparing for the UPSC exams, thinking about India's sheer size and diversity. What specific ways, what platforms or mechanisms do you think would actually work best? How can we effectively find, support, and scale up these grassroots innovations across all the different sectors and regions?
And building on that, for anyone focused on India's economic strategy or development policy, figuring out how to truly foster innovation from the grassroots. Well, it's not just a side issue, is it? It feels pretty central to achieving sustainable, inclusive growth going forward.
We genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this. Please do like this deep dive if you found it useful, subscribe for more, and definitely leave a comment below with your ideas or any questions you might have.
We'll try to address them in future discussions.
And just to mention, our discussion today was based on insights and analysis from the Indian Express.